Rules of thumb are incredibly useful because they help us make quick decisions for complicated problems without getting lost in the weeds. When you're early in the process, they give you that sense of direction and momentum instead of standing there in a paralyzed state staring at this big, complex problem. One of the most popular examples of that in personal finance is the 4% rule. And while it can be a very helpful starting point, the way it's commonly used creates blind spots that don't show up until you're much closer to or already in retirement. At some point, almost everyone who seriously starts thinking about retirement comes across the 4% rule. At a high level, it says that you can safely withdraw 4% of your portfolio in the first year of retirement, adjust that amount for inflation each year, and historically, your money will last 30 years. So let's say you retire with $1 million saved. In year one, 4% of that portfolio is $40,000. That's the amount you withdraw to cover your expenses. If inflation runs at say 3%, then in year two, you don't withdraw another 4% of whatever your balance happens to be at that point in time. You withdraw $41,200, which is the original $40,000 bumped up by inflation. In year three, you adjust again. If inflation is another 3%, that withdrawal becomes roughly $42,400. The key detail here is that the withdrawals are based on a dollar amount, not a percentage that gets recalculated every year. You never go back and recalculate 4% of whatever your remaining portfolio balance happens to be each year. The reason it's become so popular is that it gave normal people a simple way to turn a big, abstract retirement number into something tangible that connects the questions of how much do I need and how much can I spend. If you are still decades away from retirement, it can even be useful as a rough reference point to figure out if your savings direction makes sense or whether you're wildly off course. Where things start to fall apart is how the rule gets used. The creator, Bill Bengen, never built this thing for people to follow like some unbreakable law. It was always meant to be a super conservative guideline and a stress test to check if your portfolio could survive the ugliest stretches of history we've ever seen. But over time, people turned it into this guaranteed magic number. And the moment you take a rigid guideline and drop it into a real-world environment, the way it plays out starts to change. This is where sequence of return risk comes into play. When you're withdrawing money from a portfolio, it's not just how much the market returns over time that matters. It's the order in which those returns happen. Let's go back to the same $1 million example from earlier. Imagine Yuki and Franco retire with identical $1 million portfolios invested the same way, following the same 4% rule. Both start by withdrawing $40,000 in year one, then follow the withdrawal sequence the rule calls for. Over the next 30 years, both portfolios earn the exact same average annual return. On paper, you'd expect the outcomes to look pretty similar, but in reality, they don't. Yuki retires in a strong market, so the first few years are good. Even after withdrawals, his portfolio grows, which gives him a buffer. When a bad market eventually shows up later, the portfolio is larger, and the withdrawals represent a smaller percentage of what's left. Franco retires into a rough stretch. Markets drop early over the first few years, and while the portfolio is down, he's still pulling out the same inflation-adjusted $40,000 every year. And here's where sequence of returns risk shows up. Yuki's $40,000 withdrawal from his now $1.2 million portfolio is a 3.3% withdrawal rate. But if Franco's portfolio drops to $800,000 early on due to that bad market, that same $40,000 is now a 5% withdrawal, even though he didn't change anything. Both Yuki and Franco are going to end up with the same average annual return by the end of it. But Franco is going to end up with less money because early on, he was withdrawing the same amount from a much smaller portfolio. This is why early returns, aka the sequence of returns, matter so much more than the later ones when you're withdrawing money using the 4% rule. Losses early on in the first few years of retirement gets amplified because you are taking the same amount out while the portfolio is already under pressure. Now here's an important clarification. Statistically, the 4% rule does account for sequence of returns risk. It was deliberately designed to survive some of the worst historical sequences of returns we've ever seen. That's why it's so conservative with its 4% number. But surviving bad sequences on paper isn't the same thing as helping someone live through them in real time. It's just like me when I go to the Whitewater Center in Charlotte. Looking at the zip line when I first walk in doesn't scare me, But getting to the top of the tower and peering over the edge triggers a totally different fear-based reaction. On the outside, I'm keeping it together because my 8-year-old niece is standing next to me with zero fear in her body. On the inside, I'm thinking, oh my god, Uncle Jarrad feels like he's gonna die today. It's the same idea with the 4% rule. It assumes that you can live through bad sequences of returns, but it doesn't do much to help you manage them. Because while the math may hold up historically, the experiences are polar opposites. Yuki, who retired in a good market, feels calm, he feels confident, maybe even a little lucky. So sticking to his plan feels extremely easy. Now, Franco, on the other hand, is living through a horror movie, watching years of his savings shrink while he's pulling money out every single month or every single year. Every withdrawal feels more extreme because it is. He's probably glued to the news and second-guessing every single decision he's ever made in his life. Suddenly, what looked simple on paper turns into a real-time decision-making problem. The questions start creeping into his head. Do I keep spending the same amount? Do I cut back? Do I wait it out? Do I go back to work? Do I change anything? The rule doesn't answer those questions because it was never meant to. It assumes perfect execution through imperfect conditions. The order of returns is one thing, but the 4% rule also doesn't account for a change in other underlying factors. It assumes a much simpler retirement than most people are actually going to have. If you're one of those simple retirement people, then that's awesome, great, but you shouldn't blindly assume you're going to be. For starters, the rule treats retirement savings as one big pile of money, so it doesn't account for taxes in any meaningful way. It assumes that whatever you withdraw will be enough to both cover your spending and pay the taxes owed on that withdrawal. In reality, how much you actually get to spend depends heavily on where that money is coming from. Many of you, myself included, are going to retire with a mix of different accounts. Pre-tax accounts like 401ks, 403bs, 457s, and traditional IRAs. Post-tax accounts like Roth IRAs and employer-sponsored Roth accounts. Taxable brokerage accounts. And accounts that don't fit neatly into either bucket like HSAs. A $40,000 withdrawal doesn't mean the same thing across those accounts. Instead of distinguishing between each of them, the 4% rule treats every single dollar as if it behaves the same. It also doesn't account for investment fees. These things are like your degenerate roommate that wakes up in the middle of the night to eat all of your food and steal your credit card details. Even small differences in fund fees quietly reduce how much is actually available to you over time. Layer on top a financial planner overcharging you a 1% fee, and your 4% rule ain't 4% any longer since it doesn't adjust for that fee drag. It assumes a frictionless portfolio where returns show up very cleanly and withdrawals come out smoothly. Then there's asset allocation. The rule was tested under very specific portfolio assumptions, which I believe was 63% stocks and 37% bonds at the time. But real portfolios don't stay frozen in time. Allocations are going to shift, risk tolerances change, some people de-risk and some people don't, and two portfolios with the same balance can behave very differently depending on how they're structured. I even know that there's a lot of you out there who plan to hold very little or even no money in bonds in retirement. That changes how the traditional 4% rule is going to work. The rule also quietly assumes a 30-year retirement. That might fit some people perfectly, but for others, retirement could last 20 years and you underspend, or 40 years and you overspend. Stretching a rule built around a specific time horizon far beyond its original context changes the math in ways it doesn't warn you about. The rule was built around a 100% historical success rate. It's like the paranoid prepper of the retirement withdrawal world. In other words, the withdrawal rate was chosen so the portfolio never ran out of money in any of the historical 30-year periods that were tested, including the absolute worst retirement start dates we've ever seen. That design choice is a big reason the number looks the way it does. It's intentionally conservative because it's trying to survive under all historical conditions. Now, on the surface, this doesn't seem like a bad thing. You'd think that you would want a 100% success rate for your retirement plan. Now, what's interesting, though, is that this isn't how most real-world retirement plans are actually built. Certified financial planners typically don't design plans around a rigid 100% success rate. Instead, they use probability-based planning and weigh trade-offs between safety and flexibility. In some cases, that could look like an 80% success rate, and in others, it could be 90%. A plan with a high likelihood of success but not absolute certainty is often considered perfectly reasonable, especially when spending can be adjusted. The 4% rule is hard-coded to never fail. Professional planning usually accepts that uncertainty exists and focuses on managing it instead of pretending that it can be eliminated. As I said earlier, none of this means the 4% rule is useless. It means it's operating with a simplified model of retirement where a ton of different factors around what's going on with your money don't change. Real retirement is way messier than that. And when a rule built on simplified assumptions meets a very complex real-world situation, the rule doesn't adapt. Once you zoom out from the assumptions and look at how retirement actually plays out, another issue shows up pretty quickly. Spending in retirement just isn't as clean or predictable as most rules assume because spending does not move in a straight line. As with our pre-retirement years, some years you're going to spend less than expected and others you don't. You might have a stretch where expenses are lower than planned, followed by a year where something bigger comes up, replacing a roof or car, some sort of medical cost, helping a family member, or any other one-time expense you knew was going to happen but didn't know exactly when. None of that fits neatly into a fixed 4% annual withdrawal number. If you're withdrawing $40,000 per year from a $1 million portfolio, but one year you're going to spend an extra $30,000 to purchase a car, then withdrawing $70,000 in 1 year is going to blow up the whole plan. Do you make up for that later by spending less? Do you ignore it and just keep going? Do you rerun the numbers? Do you worry that you just broke the plan? The rule doesn't tell you since it wasn't designed for that level of detail or decision making. That's why in more robust retirement planning tools, you're able to model one-time expenses and stress test them instead of pretending that spending is going to be perfectly smooth. For example, I personally use Bolden where I can plug in larger one-time purchases and see whether the plan can absorb them or whether adjustments are going to be needed. I'll put a link in the description if you want to check it out. Now to be clear, you're obviously not going to know the exact year you'll need to replace a car, a roof, or whatever decades in advance. But even modeling those kinds of expenses loosely can be extremely helpful. It gives you the sense of where the pressure points are and whether your plan has room to flex. And if you're still many years away from retirement, like most of us are, you don't need to obsess over this kind of detailed planning all the time. But every few years, plugging in broad assumptions and stress testing larger, irregular expenses can help you get a sanity check for whether you are on track or whether small adjustments today could make those future decisions a lot less stressful. Even though it's easy to point out how the 4% rule kind of breaks down in the real world, it's not totally useless. If you are still in the accumulation phase, it gives you something concrete to aim for when you're trying to figure out whether you're even in the ballpark. For that purpose, it's incredibly useful. Where people get into trouble is when they keep using it the same way as they get closer to retirement. At that point, the assumptions behind a simple rule start to matter a lot more. That's when things start to show up like Social Security tax torpedoes, Roth conversions, IRMA surcharges, and required minimum distributions, none of which the 4% rule accounts for. The question has to change from how much do I need someday to how prepared am I right now? And that's why real retirement planning usually relies on frameworks that can adapt as conditions change rather than leaning on a single static number. Personally, I'm grateful the 4% rule exists. It helped me wrap my head around this whole thing many years ago when I was just starting out. If you are familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect, I think the 4% rule got me excited enough to climb that first peak. I was still at peak stupid at that point, but the momentum mattered since it got me engaged enough to be curious and move forward. I'll also continue using it for examples in my videos because it's directionally correct and makes certain concepts a lot easier to understand without overwhelming a lot of viewers. When I do that, just know that the number is not an end-all be-all number. And that's exactly how the rule is best used. From there, the natural next step is to understand what those more flexible, real-world withdrawal approaches actually look like and how people plan around uncertainty instead of pretending that it doesn't even exist. If you need help with more detailed retirement planning, I'll have a link in the description to gain access to certified financial planners that I approve of because they charge an hourly flat fee. While those other withdrawal approaches are important to understand, you'll also need to understand what the 3 layers of a successful retirement look like, which you can learn about in this video to your left next. Hit that like button to support the channel. I'll see you in the next one, friends. Done.